He made 47 missed calls disappear with a single swipe. That's who Dante Morty was. On the night his daughter forced her way into the world through blood and storm and silence, he stood in a ballroom 3 miles away, laughing at another woman's joke, sealing the deal that would triple his empire. Isabella screamed his name into a phone he never answered. She screamed it 47 times. And when Aurora finally arrived, wet, purple, furious, alive, the only hand Isabella held belonged to Alina, her best friend, a woman who had no obligation to be there but showed up anyway. Dante didn't. If you've ever watched someone choose power over the people who love them, drop your city in the comments below. Hit that like button and stay until the very end, because this story doesn't go where you think it's going. Cool. The rain started at 9:14 p.m. By the time it turned into something the Weather Service would later call a historic storm event. The windows of the Grand Callaway Hotel were sheeted white, and the ballroom on the 42nd floor had sealed itself off from the outside world with the quiet confidence of a place that charged $1,200 a plate. Inside, the air smelled of aged whiskey and expensive cologne and the specific kind of tension that lives between men who need each other and don't trust each other even a little. Dante Morty stood at the center of it. He was 41 years old, 6'2", with the kind of stillness that rooms noticed. His suit was charcoal Italian wool, no tie, top button open, deliberate. The men around him wore more. He wore less. That was always the signal. You didn't need ornamentation when your last name carried its own weight, and the Morty name had been carrying weight in this city since before half the people in this room were born. His father, Carlo Morty, had built the original organization from a 2-room accounting office and a collection of handshake agreements that were enforced with considerably more than handshakes. Dante had inherited all of it, the empire, the reputation, the enemies, and the unspoken understanding that every single thing he touched came with a price denominated in something other than money. He didn't think about that tonight. Tonight was about Senator Aldrich Voss. Voss was 63, silver-haired, with the practiced warmth of a man who had been shaking hands for 40 years and had long since stopped meaning it. He was standing 12 feet away, listening to a story being told by one of his junior aides, laughing at the right moment. Dante had watched him do this for the last 90 minutes. The laugh was real enough to be convincing and hollow enough to be safe. Voss had survived 4 administrations, 2 federal investigations, and 1 very public affair, and he had survived all of it because he understood the most important rule of staying alive in powerful rooms. Give people just enough of what they want to keep them from looking at what they're not getting. Dante understood the same rule. That was why they were here. Bianca Rossi materialized at his elbow with the practiced silence of someone who had spent years learning how to be useful without being noticed until she chose to be. She was 36, dark-haired, with a mind like a legal brief and a face that gave away exactly as much as she decided it should give away. She had been Dante's political strategist for 4 years, and she was the best he had ever hired, which meant she was also the most expensive, which meant she was also the most dangerous. "He's going to want the waterfront parcel confirmed before he commits," she said, her voice low enough that it didn't exist outside the 2 feet between them. "He's not getting it confirmed tonight." "Then he's not committing tonight." Dante turned his head slightly, not enough to look at her directly, just enough to indicate he was listening. "What does he actually need?" "He needs to tell the story that he came here for a charity dinner and came away with a handshake and nothing else. He needs the paper trail to start next week, in his office, with his lawyers present. And what do we need? We need him to go home tonight committed, which means we need to give him something he can't walk back from without consequences." Dante was quiet for a moment. He picked up his drink, bourbon, barely touched, and rotated it once between his fingers. "Set up the photo." Bianca looked at him sideways. "Not that kind," he said. "The 3 of us. By the window. Make it look accidental. Give it to Hendricks." Hendricks was the journalist they kept on retainer, a man who had long since traded his principles for a salary and a car and the specific psychological comfort of knowing he would never be the one who got the story wrong because he was the one controlling which stories got written. Let Voss see it happen. Let him understand what kind of documentation already exists of this evening before he decides whether to get cute about the waterfront. Bianca was already moving before he finished the sentence. That was another thing he valued about her. She didn't need the explanation completed. She heard the architecture of what he wanted and built it. Dante's phone was in his left jacket pocket. He felt it vibrate at 9:31. He didn't reach for it. He had a rule about phones during meetings, and this was a meeting regardless of what the invitation had called it. He registered the vibration with the same calm he brought to everything, noted it, filed it, moved on. He didn't know it was Isabella. He didn't know her water had broken 40 minutes ago, that Alana had been the one to call the car because Isabella couldn't stop shaking, that they were already on the highway heading toward Mercy General in a car whose windshield wipers couldn't keep up with what the sky was doing. He didn't know that Isabella had waited until the last possible moment to call him, because she didn't want to be the kind of wife who pulled her husband out of important moments, because he had told her, not cruelly, just factually, in the way he stated everything, that the Voss alignment was going to change the trajectory of the next 10 years, and she had understood from that statement that she was supposed to factor that information into her behavior. She had. For 47 calls, she had factored it in. The phone vibrated again at 9:38. He was talking to Voss by then, close enough to smell the senator's aftershave, watching the man's eyes the way he always watched eyes during negotiations, not for what they said, but for the microsecond delay between a thought and its expression, that tiny gap where the truth lived before the performance covered it. Voss had a good poker face, but his right hand tended to tighten on his drink when he was calculating risk. It was tightening now. Good. The phone went dark. Dante felt the stillness of it and interpreted it as silence. As the problem solved, the caller satisfied, whatever small domestic issue had arisen, now handled by someone else. This was a reasonable interpretation. Isabella had people. She had Alina. She had a household staff. She had resources. She was 8.5 months pregnant, yes, but she was also capable and organized, and she had a hospital bag packed since week 34 because Isabella did not leave things unprepared. He did not imagine that she was currently gripping a steel rail in a hospital corridor, soaking wet from running from the car through the rain, breathing through a contraction while a nurse asked her insurance questions. He did not imagine that his daughter was already on her way. The phone vibrated again at 9:52, and again at 10:03, and 4 times in rapid succession between 10:17 and 10:23, and he felt each one of them as a background noise, the way you feel traffic through a closed window in a room where something more immediate is happening. Voss had shifted. The hand on the drink had relaxed. The photo had been taken. Dante had caught it in his peripheral vision, Bianca smoothly introducing a Hendrix camera into a moment that looked like nothing. Just 3 people near a window, just documentation of an unremarkable evening. Voss had seen it. Voss had understood. The calculation behind his eyes had completed itself. The waterfront proposal, Voss said, as if he were suggesting it for the first time, seems like something worth exploring formally. Absolutely, Dante said. They shook hands. Voss's aide materialized to shepherd him toward another cluster of guests, and Bianca returned to Dante's side with the satisfied precision of a chess player who has just confirmed checkmate. Done, she said. Good. You should smile, she said. This is worth smiling at. He didn't smile. He almost never did, not genuinely, not in rooms like this. He turned to scan the room, checking entrances, checking the arrangement of bodies, the old habit that had kept him alive through situations considerably more dangerous than charity dinners. His phone vibrated again. This time, he glanced down purely on instinct. The screen showed 31 missed calls, all from Isabella. The room didn't change. The noise didn't stop. Nothing external shifted at all. But something in Dante's chest did something it rarely did. It lurched. He was already moving toward the exit before his brain had fully processed the number. 31. In 90 minutes. He did the math without meaning to. 1 call every 3 minutes, then gaps, then clusters. The pattern of someone escalating. The pattern of someone who had started with the expectation that he would answer and ended with something else entirely. He hit her contact and pressed the phone to his ear and listened to it ring 4 times before it went to voicemail. And the voicemail was her voice from 18 months ago, calm and clear, asking callers to leave a message. And the distance between that recorded voice and whatever was happening right now landed on him like a physical weight. He called again. Voicemail. He found Alina's number and called it, and she picked up on the second ring. "Where is she?" His voice came out flat, the way it always came out when he was controlling something. "Mercy General." Alina's voice was not flat. Her voice was doing something it had never done in the 12 years he had known her, a kind of controlled fury that was barely controlling itself. "Room 408. Your daughter is 4 hours old. Isabella did everything alone." The call ended before he could respond. He stood in the corridor outside the Grand Calloway's ballroom with 31 missed calls, and then he noticed 14 more, because the phone had kept going while he was inside, while he was shaking the senator's hand, while Bianca was orchestrating photographs, 45 total now, 46, and when he unlocked the screen and saw the call log, it scrolled and scrolled and scrolled, and there was nothing from anyone else in it, just Isabella, just his wife, calling him over and over across the span of 4 hours from the moment she went into labor to the moment she apparently stopped. 47 calls. He had declined to answer 47 calls while his daughter was born. He sat in the back of his car in silence for 23 minutes before he told the driver to go. Mercy General at 1:15 a.m. was a different world than the Grand Calloway. The light was institutional fluorescent, the air antiseptic and slightly warm, and the corridor outside room 408 smelled of cleaning fluid and the particular exhaustion that collects in hospital wings after midnight. Dante walked it in his $1,200 shoes and his charcoal suit, and he felt, for possibly the first time in 15 years, completely unsuited to where he was. Alina was in the chair outside the room. She stood when she saw him coming, and the movement had no warmth in it. It was the movement of someone taking a position. She was 40 years old, compact and dark-eyed, and she had known Isabella since they were 8 years old, sitting next to each other in a classroom in the kind of neighborhood this hospital's charity wing still served. Alina had watched Isabella fall in love with Dante Morty and had kept her mouth shut about her reservations because Isabella was happy, and because Alina understood that the people we love don't always choose the people we would choose for them. But there was a limit, and Dante was looking at a woman who had reached it. "She's sleeping," Alina said. "I need to see her." "She's sleeping," Alina said again, with identical inflection. And it was clear that these two sentences were the only ones she was prepared to have this conversation with. The additional subtext, "You don't get to need things right now. You don't get to be the urgent party right now," was in the set of her jaw. Dante stopped 6 feet from her. "How is she?" "Tired. She pushed for 2 hours without anyone she was supposed to be able to count on." Alina's voice didn't rise. That was worse somehow than if it had. "The nurses were kind. Aurora is healthy. 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Your daughter has your coloring and your mother's eyes." He absorbed this without moving. "I didn't hear the calls until 47 calls, Dante." She let that sit. "I was there. I watched her call you between contractions. I watched her stop calling you because she needed both hands. I watched her push your daughter into the world, and I watched her face when it was over and you weren't there. And that is an image I'm going to have in my head for the rest of my life. And I don't have anything else to say about it." She sat back down in the chair and looked at the wall. Dante pushed the door open as quietly as he could. The room was dim. The monitoring equipment made soft, rhythmic sounds. And in the hospital bed, Isabella slept. He stood inside the doorway for a long moment and looked at his wife. She was 29 years old, and she had met him when she was 24 and he was 36. And she had known what she was walking into. She hadn't been naive about it, not exactly. But there is knowing a thing in the abstract, and then there is experiencing the specific shape of it over 5 years, and the shapes accumulate. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful, in the specific way that has nothing to do with symmetry and everything to do with the quality of attention, the way she looked at things, the way she held her concentration still when something mattered to her. She had dark circles under her eyes that no amount of sleep would erase tonight. Her hair was pushed back roughly. Her left hand rested on the blanket and the wedding ring caught the low light from the equipment displays. Beside her, in the bassinet that the nurses had positioned close enough for her to reach without getting up, was Aurora. Dante crossed the room slowly. He looked at his daughter for the first time. She was impossibly small. That was the first thing. He had understood intellectually that newborns were small, but understanding a thing intellectually was not the same as looking at her, at this specific creature, at the miniature fist that had escaped the swaddling blanket, at the dark hair plastered to her skull. She was breathing in the quick, shallow rhythm of newborns, and her face was doing the small, random movements that faces do when the brain is still figuring out it's attached to one. He reached out and touched her cheek with one finger, just the pad of his index finger, barely contact. She didn't react. She was deeply, utterly asleep, in the way that only people who have never been betrayed by the world can sleep. "She has your coloring," Isabella said. He turned. She was awake. She was watching him from the bed with an expression that was not angry and was not sad and was not anything he had a ready name for. It was the expression of someone who has already processed an event and moved to the other side of it while you were still arriving. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know." "Isabella, I know you are." Her voice was quiet, steady. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at Aurora. "The apology doesn't change the math. I called you 47 times. Those 47 calls are a fact. What they mean is up to you to sit with." He wanted to say something about the meeting. He wanted to explain the phone rule, the significance of the evening, the Voss alignment, the 10-year projection. He opened his mouth and he closed it again because, as he did so, he heard it. He heard what it would sound like to say any of it, and he closed his mouth. "Come sit down," she said. He sat in the chair beside the bed. Not the one near the door where Alina had been. Another chair, pulled close to the bassinet. Neither of them spoke. The equipment made its sounds. Rain continued against the window, less violent now, trailing off into a standard November night. Dante sat in his suit in a hospital chair and looked at his daughter and did not say anything for a long time, and Isabella did not ask him to. When she finally fell back asleep, it was with her head turned slightly away from him, toward Aurora. He stayed until morning. He didn't sleep. The story of the photograph broke 4 days later. Dante was in his office at Morty Financial Group when Garrett, his head of communications, a thin, precise man who handled bad news the way a surgeon handles infected tissue, with instruments and no sentiment, walked in without knocking, which was itself the signal. Garrett only bypassed the knock when something had already metastasized. He placed a tablet on the desk. Dante looked at the screen. The image was from the Grand Calloway. Dante and Bianca, side by side near the window, the city behind them, both of them in sharp focus. Bianca was smiling. Dante, though he had not been smiling that night, had been captured in a half-turn that created, at the wrong angle, in the wrong light, with the wrong caption, the implication of intimacy. The caption, across 3 platforms and 2 tabloid outlets by the time Garrett was in his office, read variations on Morty Empire's billion-dollar night, business or pleasure. "How many outlets?" Dante said. 7 at last count. 3 legitimate, 4 tabloid. The tabloids are running the infidelity angle. The legitimate outlets are hedging but running the corruption angle. The photo places you with Senator Voss in the same evening, and 2 of the political desks are now asking about the waterfront parcel. The photo was staged. "I know, but the original image," Garrett swiped to a second file, "was captured by a professional-grade lens from the opposite end of the ballroom. Not Hendrix's camera. Someone else was there with a high-quality setup and a specific intention." Dante was very still. "Hendrix didn't leak it," Garrett said. "I confirmed. Someone else sent the original file to the tabloids and the outlets simultaneously from an anonymous server. The resolution on this original file is better than anything Hendrix equipment produces. Whoever took this photo was not working for us." Dante said nothing for a moment. Then, "Who had access to the guest list?" "That's the question, isn't it?" He stood and walked to the window. The city spread below him, wet from yesterday's rain. He thought about the 47 calls and the ballroom in the senator's hand, and the moment he had let himself believe that the evening had been managed cleanly. "Get me the raw security footage from the Grand Calloway, every camera, and pull the communications logs from the last 30 days on everyone who knew about the Voss meeting." Garrett was writing. "That's a significant internal sweep. Do it quietly." "And Bianca?" Dante thought about Bianca. He thought about her efficiency and her precision and the way she had moved through the ballroom like someone who had choreographed the evening in advance. He thought about the photograph, the angle, the timing, the quality of the lens. "Include her in the sweep," he said. "Don't tell her." Garrett left. Dante called Isabella. She answered on the third ring. In the background, he could hear the small sounds of the apartment. The white noise machine they'd bought for the nursery, distant and constant. "The photograph is going to be everywhere by this afternoon," he said. A pause. "I know. Elena texted me. It's not. I know what it is and isn't, Dante." Her voice was calm. Not the distant calm of 4 days ago, something different now, something more deliberate. "The question isn't what it actually was. The question is what it's going to cost." He said nothing. "Aurora had her first pediatric appointment this morning," Isabella said. "She's healthy, she's feeding well. The doctor says her color is good." A beat. "You could have come." He hadn't known about the appointment. That was the specific truth that landed on him in the following silence, and it landed badly. He hadn't known because no one had told him, and he hadn't asked. He had been in the office since 6 a.m. because there were responses to draft and statements to review, and a communications strategy to build around a scandal that was partially a manufactured fiction and partially a consequence of his own calculated choices. And his daughter had her first appointment with her pediatrician this morning, and he had not been there because he had not thought to ask. "I'll be there for the next one," he said. Isabella said, "Okay," in the tone of someone filing information rather than accepting a promise. The call ended. Dante stood at his office window for another minute. Below, a delivery truck was navigating a narrow street, inching forward and back. He watched it until it cleared the corner, and then he turned back to his desk. 3 weeks passed. In those 3 weeks, the scandal did what scandals do when they have real fuel and artificial accelerant both. It expanded. A second outlet published a piece that connected the waterfront parcel to a zoning decision that had been quietly pushed through 2 years prior, and that piece was picked up by a national political newsletter, and the national political newsletter framed it in language that used the word corruption 4 times in 6 paragraphs. Senator Voss's office issued a statement that contained the phrase, "no improper relationship," in a way that technically denied one kind of relationship while creating the negative space in which readers filled in everything else. Investors began calling. 2 of them exited positions. 3 more scheduled calls that they characterized as informational, but which were audits in the language of men who needed not to call them audits. The Morty Financial Group's communications team put out 3 statements in 10 days, each one more carefully worded than the last, each one producing a news cycle that asked why 3 statements had been necessary. Inside the organization, Garrett's internal sweep was ongoing and quiet. The communications logs were extensive. The people who had known about the Voss meeting numbered 11, including Bianca, including 2 members of the executive leadership team, including Dante's personal assistant and 2 operational directors who had been with the organization for a decade or more. Dante reviewed the preliminary findings on a Tuesday afternoon and looked at the pattern of outgoing communications from the week prior to the Grand Callaway. 1 flag, then another, then a third in a chain of messages that had been routed through a secondary account, the kind of routing that someone would set up if they understood internal monitoring and wanted to stay outside it. The secondary account was new, created 8 days before the event, and the messages in it were not signed and the recipients were anonymized, but the access timestamps matched. The device that had accessed the secondary account had also accessed the Morty Secure internal server 6 times in the 72 hours prior to the Grand Callaway evening. It was a thread. Thin, but it was a thread. Garrett came in at 4 p.m. with a look on his face that Dante had not seen on him before. "The thread traces back to Bianca's access credentials," he said. Dante said nothing. "I want to be precise," Garrett said, clearly having worked out how to say this in advance. "The device that accessed the secondary account used credentials that match Bianca's security clearance. That's not the same as proving she personally—" "I know the distinction. We'd need more to present anything formal." "I know." Dante leaned back in his chair. The city was dark outside the windows now. "What else?" Garrett set a second folder on the desk. "The lens that captured the photograph. We identified the type from the image metadata, professional long range, the kind of equipment that costs about $8,000 retail." I had our vendor run a quiet inquiry through the photography rental market in the city for that evening. One rental matching that equipment profile. He paused. It was rented under a company name. The company is a shell. The shell traces to an address that traces to, He paused again. Say it. An address registered to a financial holding associated with Ricci Capital Management. Garrett watched him. Enzo Ricci. The name settled over the room. Dante didn't move. Enzo Ricci had been his late father's financial advisor for 22 years. Carlo Mordi had trusted him the way Carlo trusted very few people, completely, which in Carlo's case meant not entirely, but more than most. Dante had kept Enzo at a remove since Carlo's death 3 years ago, a strategic distance he had justified to himself as a generational transition, as the natural reconfiguration that happens when an empire passes from one set of hands to another. Enzo had accepted the remove with the gracious patience of a man who knows how to wait. He's behind Bianca, Dante said. It wasn't a question. It would explain certain things, Garrett said carefully. Dante was quiet for a moment. He thought about his father. He thought about the shape of Carlo Mordi's trust, the way his father had distributed it, the people he had admitted into the innermost ring, and what those people had understood about the organization and its vulnerabilities. He thought about the 22 years of access that Enzo Ricci had accumulated, the filing cabinets and the board meetings and the handshakes witnessed, and the strategies discussed in rooms where Enzo had been the man in the corner taking careful, meticulous notes. He thought about a shell company and a long-range lens and 47 missed calls and a photograph that had been positioned with the precision of someone who knew exactly what they needed to create and exactly how to create it. Don't move on anything yet, Dante said. We build the case properly. Document everything. Legal review on every step. Garrett looked at him with mild surprise. No back channels, Dante said. No pressure campaigns. We do this clean. He went home that night at 8 o'clock. Aurora was in the living room in a bouncer chair, wide awake, making the small, purposeless movements of a 3-week-old working out how her limbs connected to the rest of her. Isabella was cross-legged on the floor nearby with the laptop open, but she wasn't looking at the laptop. She was watching the baby. Dante sat down on the floor beside her. They didn't say anything for a while. Aurora waved one fist in the direction of a hanging mobile and did not connect with it and did not care. She's going to be impatient, Isabella said. Look at that face. She wants to do things, and she doesn't have the coordination yet, and she is furious about it. She gets that from you, Dante said. Isabella glanced sideways at him. He looked back at her. It wasn't quite a smile between them. It wasn't exactly comfortable yet. It was going to take longer than 3 weeks to get back to comfortable, but it was something. It was the first thing that had been something. Isabella looked back at the baby. I've been thinking about the foundation. He waited. There's a gap in the city's services for children aging out of transitional housing. Nobody's talking about it. The policy environment is bad and the private funding is sporadic, and the outcomes are... She stopped herself, the way she always stopped herself when she was building momentum on a new project, and caught herself about to say everything at once. I want to do something real, not a check-writing operation, an actual institutional structure. What do you need? She looked at him again. He could tell she had been expecting a different response, a redirect, a gentle concern about timing, a suggestion that she wait until things settled. He had given her those responses before. He was aware of it. Preliminary research, she said carefully. Some legal consultation on nonprofit structure. I have a meeting next week with a woman who runs a youth services organization on the East Side. I want to understand the landscape before I build anything. Okay, he said. Okay. I'll connect you with the Morty Foundation's legal team. They know the nonprofit environment and they can give you structure without... He stopped. He'd been about to say without tying it to us, and he heard how that would land. They can help you build something that's actually yours. Isabella studied him for a moment with the kind of attention she usually gave to the baby, patient and precise. Thank you, she said. She turned back to the laptop and began typing. Dante watched his daughter fight the mobile for another 15 minutes before her eyes began to close in the sudden, total way that newborns have, fully present, and then fully absent in the span of 30 seconds. He reached over carefully and picked her up, and she didn't wake up, and he held her against his chest while she slept with the absolute, unfounded trust of someone who has only 3 weeks of evidence about the world and has not yet learned to discount any of it. He sat there for 2 hours. Isabella worked beside him. The apartment was quiet. Somewhere across the city, in an office they would identify 2 weeks later, Enzo Ricci's patience was converting itself into the next step of a plan 20 years in the making, and a scandal was spreading through financial markets and political circles with the precision of something that had been seeded with care. 2 of Dante's executive directors were checking their exposure. A senator was recalibrating his public position. The photograph was being shared again on new platforms, finding new audiences, accumulating new layers of interpretation. And Dante Morti was sitting on his living room floor in his charcoal suit with his 3-week-old daughter asleep on his chest, looking at the ceiling, beginning to understand that the thing he was about to fight for was not his empire. He would not realize until considerably later, not until the letter, not until the final accounting, that his father had known this moment would come. That Carlo Morti, in the careful architecture of everything he had left behind, had tried to tell him. He would not realize it yet, but his daughter was breathing against his chest, slow and steady and absolute, and somewhere in the machinery of the next 24 hours, the thread that Garrett had found was about to pull something much larger than anyone except Enzo Ricci had anticipated, and even Enzo had not anticipated everything. The phone on the end table lit up at 10:47 p.m. It was a message from a number Dante didn't recognize. 7 words, no name attached, sent from a burner that would be dead by morning. It read, "She didn't act alone. Ask Enzo who gave the order." Dante read the message 3 times, 7 words. No punctuation on the last sentence. The grammar was clean and deliberate, which meant whoever sent it was educated, which meant it wasn't a random tip. It was a calculated one, sent by someone who understood the difference between information and leverage and had chosen, for reasons of their own, to hand this particular piece to him rather than hold it. He set the phone face down on the end table. Aurora was still asleep on his chest. Her weight was small and specific and real in a way that very little else in his life felt right now. He didn't move. He sat with the message and with his daughter, and with the particular quality of silence that descends on a room when something has just changed and hasn't finished changing yet. Isabella glanced over from her laptop. She read his face the way she had learned to read it over 5 years. Not perfectly, but well enough to know when not to ask. She looked back at her screen. He put Aurora down in the bassinet at 11 and went to the kitchen and stood at the counter and called Garrett. Garrett answered on the second ring. He was awake. He was always awake. "The thread from Ricci Capital," Dante said. "How confident are you?" "On the access credentials matching Bianca, 80%. The shell company and the lens rental, 90. Someone just messaged me, unknown number, said Bianca wasn't acting alone and to ask Enzo who gave the order." Silence on the other end. Then, "That's either a gift or a trap." "I know. Do you want me to cure it?" "Trace the number. Don't engage, and I want everything we have on Enzo Ricci's movements in the last 6 months. Not just financials, physical movements. What buildings, what meetings, what names. That'll take a few days to compile properly. Then start tonight." He ended the call and stood in his kitchen for another minute looking at the countertop. Isabella had put a small plant on the windowsill above the sink sometime in the last 3 weeks. He hadn't noticed it until now, a dark green thing in a terracotta pot. He didn't know when she'd bought it or what it was called. He registered this fact the way he'd been registering a lot of facts lately, late and with a dull, specific guilt. He went to bed at midnight. He did not sleep well. Woke. Bianca Rossi arrived at the Morti Financial Group offices at 7:45 a.m. the following Thursday, which was her standard time, which was itself information. A person who knows they're being watched changes their habits, and Bianca had not changed anything. Either she didn't know about the sweep, or she knew and was disciplined enough to behave as though she didn't, and Dante was not yet sure which of those was true or which was worse. He let her come to him. He had a 9 a.m. slot on the calendar for what the schedule called a communications debrief, standard and recurring. She came in with her tablet and her coffee and sat across from his desk with the contained professional energy she always carried. And for the first 15 minutes, they discussed response metrics on the latest statement and the trajectory of the waterfront story in the political press. And Dante watched her the way he watched everyone he needed information from, without appearing to watch at all. She was good. She was very good. Nothing in her body language was off. She held her coffee correctly. Her eyes moved to the right data points on the tablet. Her recommendations were specific and defensible. Then he said, "Who else knew the photographer would be there that night?" She didn't freeze. She didn't flinch. She set her coffee down, calmly, and met his eyes. "What photographer?" "The one with the long-range lens on the east balcony. Not Hendrix. Someone else." A pause. "A real one. Not performed." Her jaw moved slightly. "I didn't know there was another photographer," she said. "The equipment was rented. The rental traces to a shell company." Dante, the access credentials on the secondary communications account that was used to send material to the tabloids match your security clearance." The room went quiet. Bianca set her tablet down on the desk carefully, the way people set things down when they need their hands free to think. She looked at him for a long moment. Not the look of someone caught, not exactly, but the look of someone doing a very rapid internal calculation about how much they can still control. "I want a lawyer present," she said. "You're not being arrested. You're being asked a question." "I want a lawyer present before I answer it." He studied her. She held the eye contact without difficulty. That told him something. "Go home," he said. "Don't communicate with anyone from this organization until I contact you. Don't delete anything." She stood. She picked up her tablet and her coffee with the same precision she'd brought into the room. At the door, she stopped, her back to him. "I didn't initiate this," she said. "I know." She turned halfway. "Do you?" "Someone told me you were a pawn. I'm trying to determine if that's accurate before I decide what to do next." Something moved through her face. It was not relief exactly. It was more complicated than that. The expression of someone who has been carrying a weight they chose to carry and is now watching the choice mature into its consequences. "It's accurate," she said, and then she left. Garrett came in at noon with a folder and the look of a man who had been up since 3 a.m. and had the data to show for it. He sat and opened the folder on the desk without preamble. Dante leaned over. The document at the top was a compiled log of Enzo Ricci's meetings over a 16-month period, assembled from a combination of public calendar records, building access logs from 3 properties where Ricci Capital maintained offices, and a private security report that Garrett had obtained through a contact Dante chose not to ask about. The log was dense, 12 pages, names and dates and locations rendered in small type. 2 names recurred. The first was Marcus Holt. Holt was an executive director at Morty Financial Group, one of the old guard. He had been with the organization for 11 years, brought in by Carlo during an expansion phase in the Northeast market. He sat on the internal strategy committee. He had been in the room for the initial discussion of the Voss alignment. The second name was Douglas Vane. Vane was Morty Financial Group's chief operating officer. He had been with the organization for 14 years. He had Carlo's absolute trust, which Dante had inherited without examining closely, because certain forms of loyalty seem like permanent structures until they don't. Dante looked at the dates. Holt and Ricci had met 12 times in 16 months, always off-site, always at locations with no obvious connection to either organization. Vane and Ricci had met 7 times, 3 of those in the 6 weeks immediately preceding the Grand Callaway. "How solid is this?" Dante said. "The building access logs are primary source. The rest is circumstantial at this level, but it patterns." Garrett turned to the next page. "There's something else." He pointed to a financial summary on page 7. Ricci Capital has been quietly acquiring minority positions in 4 Morty Financial Group portfolio companies over the last 2 years. Nothing that triggers disclosure thresholds individually, but in aggregate, leverage. Enough to cause significant noise in a shareholder vote. If something destabilized Morty Financial Group's leadership at the right moment, with the right board configuration, he wouldn't need a hostile takeover, he'd just need confusion. For long enough to get his people into the right seats. Garrett closed the folder. "This isn't a scandal, Dante. The scandal is the delivery mechanism. What he actually built is a corporate coup." Dante sat back. He thought about Enzo Ricci, the man's face, The careful white hair, the hands that were always still, the voice that his father had described as the most reasonable voice in any room. Carlo had meant it as a compliment. Dante was revising the interpretation. "Call our outside legal team," he said. "Chen and Associates. I want a meeting this afternoon. Everything we have goes to them. The access logs, the financial positions, the shell company trace. We build a formal evidentiary package." "You're not going to confront Ricci directly?" Dante looked at him. "No." Garrett absorbed this. "He'll know the sweep is happening. He probably already knows. He's been 3 steps ahead for 2 years. I'm not going to let him be 3 steps ahead of how I respond to it." He stood. "We do this clean? Documentation, legal review, formal process. I'm not giving him a war. I'm giving him a case." Isabella found out about Holt and Vane on a Friday evening. Not from Dante. From Alina, who had heard it from a contact in the financial press who was already calling sources about a rumored internal investigation at Morty Financial Group, which meant it was 24 hours away from not being a rumor at all. She called Dante at 6:15. He was in the car, 15 minutes from home. He picked up. "Marcus Holt," she said. "Tell me." A beat. "Where did you hear that?" "Does it matter?" "It matters because there's a leak in my communications chain and I need to—" "Dante." Her voice was steady, but there was something under it, a tautness. "You're investigating people inside your own organization, people who have been in our lives. Marcus came to our wedding." "I know." "What do you know about Vane?" "Enough." "Enough to what?" He watched the city move past the car window. Wet streets, yellow light, the particular gray-blue of a November evening that can't decide whether it wants to be winter yet. Enough to bring it to a formal process. I'm not making accusations without documentation. Everything goes through Chen. How long has this been building? I'm still determining that. Dante? She waited a beat. How long? He didn't answer for a moment, not because he was hiding it. He was calculating, the way he always calculated, what information was safe to release and when, and he recognized the habit a half second after deploying it and recognized that deploying it with Isabella right now was precisely the wrong move. Possibly 2 years, he said. The financial positioning goes back at least that far. Silence on the line. So, the Voss meeting, she said slowly. The photograph. The scandal. Yes. This was never about a photograph. No. She was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice had changed. It was still steady, but the quality of the steadiness had shifted. It was the voice of someone who has reconfigured a map and is looking at the new version of it. I need you to understand something, she said. I'm listening. Whatever happens with this, with Ricci and Holt and all of it, I am not going to be a background detail in how it unfolds. Not again. I was a background detail on the night our daughter was born, and I have decided specifically and permanently that I am done with that role. Isabella, I'm not finished. No heat in it, just the hard, flat certainty of someone drawing a line on the ground. I'm building the foundation. That's mine. That proceeds regardless of what's happening with the organization. And you're going to be present. Not available, not reachable, not informed. Present. The difference between those things is not subtle, and I am no longer willing to pretend it is. He absorbed this. Okay, he said. I'm serious. I know you are. Are you saying okay because it's the right answer, or because you're in the car and you'll give me the full version when you get home? He almost smiled. Both, he said. Give me 15 minutes. She hung up. He looked out the window for the rest of the ride. The driver said nothing, as the driver always said nothing, which was what Dante paid for among other things. He thought about Isabella's voice on the phone. He thought about the difference between a woman who is angry at you and a woman who has made a decision about you, and how much more serious the second one is, and how for the first time in the 5 years of their marriage, he was beginning to fully appreciate the distinction. He got home at 6:32. Aurora was in the swing in the living room, the mechanical one that moved in a slow arc, and she was awake and doing her thing with her fists. Isabella was in the kitchen. She'd cooked, not the meal kit service they'd been using since Aurora arrived, and the apartment smelled of garlic and something braised, and the specific warmth of a kitchen that has been used. She looked at him when he came in. He looked at her. "Wash your hands," she said. "It's almost ready." He washed his hands. He picked up Aurora on the way to the table and held her in the crook of his left arm while Isabella brought food to the table and sat across from him, and they ate together for the first time. A real meal, not takeout containers, not the parallel consumption of food in different rooms, since before the Grand Calloway. Aurora made small sounds. Neither of them talked much, but it was a different kind of silence than the silence of 3 weeks ago. That silence had been the silence of two people maintaining safe distance. This was something closer to the silence of two people in the same place on purpose. After, when Aurora was down, they sat in the living room and he told her everything. Not the redacted version, not the information-managed version. The full architecture, Enzo Ricci, the shell companies, the minority positions, Holt and Vane, the secondary communications account, the anonymous message, Bianca. Isabella listened without interrupting. This was something she did that he had not always given sufficient credit for. Her capacity to receive information without fragmenting it into immediate response, to let it settle and find its shape before she engaged with it. When he finished, she said, "Bianca." "Yes." Did she know what she was participating in? "I think she knew she was passing information. I don't know if she understood the full scope." "Will you protect her?" He looked at her. "If she cooperates," he said. "If she's honest about the full extent of it, then yes." Isabella nodded slowly. "That's right," she said, as if checking an answer against something internal. Then, "And Ricci, what do you actually do with him? Build the case, bring it to the board and the family council. Let the evidence destroy his position without—" He stopped. "Without what?" "Without giving him the war he's designed for." He looked at his hands. "My father fought that way. Every challenge was met with force. It worked, but he considered the word. It cost things. Things I didn't fully account until they were already spent." Isabella was quiet for a moment. Then she said something she had never said directly before, not in 5 years. Carlo wasn't wrong about everything. Dante looked at her. "He built something real," she said, "with methods I don't agree with and outcomes that scared me and a cost that you're still paying. But the core of what he built, the capacity to hold something together under pressure, that's in you. The question is whether you can do it differently." He didn't have an answer for that. He sat with it. At 9:47 his phone rang. It was a number he recognized this time. Marcus Holt. He answered. "We need to talk." Holt's voice was tight, compressed, the voice of a man who has been rehearsing a call and is now making it and discovering that rehearsal doesn't cover everything. "Not at the office, not on the phone. In person, tomorrow morning, just us." Dante was very still. Across the room, Isabella watched him. 8 a.m., Dante said. "The parking structure on Clement, level 3. He ended the call. Isabella said, "Holt?" "Yes." "He's scared." "Yes." Scared men either confess or they run. Dante set the phone down on the cushion beside him. He looked at his daughter's closed bedroom door, the one they'd painted pale yellow in September, the one with the small wooden letters above the frame that spelled Aurora in a font Isabella had ordered from a craftsman upstate. "I know," he said. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at 10 o'clock on a November night, settling into its second life, the one that runs parallel to the daylight version and shares none of its pretenses. Somewhere in it, Marcus Holt was sitting with whatever he had done and whatever he was about to do, and somewhere in it Enzo Ricci was waiting with the patience of a man who had been waiting for 3 years and had not yet seen a reason to stop. And somewhere in it Bianca Rossi was sitting in her apartment with the full weight of her choices and the question of whether cooperation would be enough to matter. And in Dante Morti's living room, with the sound of the white noise machine coming softly through a pale yellow door, something had shifted, not solved, not resolved, not anywhere near finished, but shifted, in the way that a long-locked door shifts when the right key finally finds the tumbler. It wasn't open yet, but the mechanism was moving. The parking structure on Clement Street smelled of concrete dust and motor oil and the cold that had settled into the city overnight, the kind of cold that doesn't have drama in it, just persistence. Level 3 was empty at 7:58 a.m., except for 2 cars that had clearly been there since the previous day, one with a parking citation under the wiper. Dante arrived at 7:55 and stood near the stairwell door with his back to the wall and waited. Holt arrived at 8:03. He came up the stairwell rather than the elevator, which told Dante something about his current relationship with enclosed spaces. He was 54 years old, heavy-set, with the kind of face that had been trustworthy for so long it had become part of his identity, open, creased around the eyes, the face of a man who coached youth sports on weekends and remembered subordinates' birthdays. He was wearing a coat that was too light for the weather, and his hands were in his pockets, and he was not okay. They stood 8 feet apart. "You pulled my communications logs," Holt said. "Yes." "How much do you have?" "Enough to take to the board without this conversation." Dante watched him. "I'm having this conversation because I'd rather understand it than just prosecute it." Holt's jaw moved. He looked at the wall behind Dante's shoulder. "It started with a request. Ricci called me 14 months ago, said he was concerned about the direction of the organization, said he thought certain strategic decisions were being made without adequate consultation of the people who had built the foundation." He paused. "He framed it as loyalty to your father." "Of course he did. I know how it sounds now." Holt's voice had the specific flatness of a man who has been having an internal argument with himself for a long time and is exhausted by it. At the time, it felt like, I don't know, like someone was finally saying what people had been thinking. Carlo had a way of including people. "You're different." "Different," Dante said. "You make decisions without consultation. You moved the Northeast portfolio without a strategy meeting. You restructured the compensation framework for the senior team without—" "Marcus." Dante's voice didn't rise, it compressed. "I know my management style. That's not why you're in a parking structure at 8 in the morning. Tell me what you gave him." Holt's hands came out of his pockets. He rubbed one over his face. "Board meeting minutes. 12 months of them. Internal financial forecasts. The preliminary framework for the Voss alignment, the legal structure, the waterfront parcel terms, the timeline." The waterfront parcel terms. Dante held that information without reacting to it externally. Internally, something cold moved through him. Not rage, something more precise than rage. The Voss alignment had been compromised before the Grand Callaway, before the photograph, before the scandal, before any of it. Enzo Ricci had known the shape of the deal before it was made. "Vain," Dante said. "What did he give?" "I don't know the full scope of what Douglas gave. We weren't in contact about it. Ricci kept us separate." "Deliberately." "Yes." Dante looked at him for a long moment. Holt met his eyes and then couldn't hold it and looked away, which was the answer to the question Dante hadn't asked yet, whether Holt understood what he'd done. "What did Ricci tell you the goal was?" Dante said. "Reform." Holt said the word with the specific bitterness of someone who recognizes they used it sincerely once. Restructuring the leadership. Bringing in people who understood the original vision. His people. "I understand that now." "Did you know about the photograph?" "No." Immediate, unguarded. "No. I knew about the communications, the leak to the media about the scandal. I understood that was part of it after the fact. But the photograph, the equipment, the shell company, I didn't know those existed until your sweep flagged it and Garrett started asking questions." Dante believed him, not because Holt was trustworthy. He had clearly established the limits of that, but because the specific texture of the denial was right. A man can lie smoothly about many things. The things he didn't do tend to come out differently than the things he did. "You're going to cooperate fully with Chen and Associates," Dante said. "Everything you have, documents, communications, dates, conversations, you put it all in front of them." "And then?" And then we determine what happens to you based on how complete your cooperation is and what the legal exposure looks like. He paused. I'm not promising you anything. I'm telling you that full cooperation is the only version of this conversation that doesn't end with a referral to a federal prosecutor. Holt nodded slowly. His face had gone gray in the cold. There's something else, he said. Dante waited. Ricci had a meeting 3 weeks ago. I wasn't there. I found out through Douglas. Before I understood I shouldn't be talking to Douglas about any of this. He stopped, organized himself. He met with someone from your family council, not just a financial advisor, a member. The family council was the inner governance structure of the Morty organization. 7 people, all of whom had direct blood or long-standing institutional ties to the organization's core operations. They met quarterly. They controlled the succession framework. Which member? Dante said. Holt said the name. Dante did not move. He did not change expression. He stood in the cold concrete air of the parking structure and absorbed the name and held it with the particular stillness that is not calm, but is what comes after the moment when something you suspected but refused to fully articulate becomes a fact. The name was Victor Morty, his uncle, his father's younger brother, who had sat at Carlo's right hand for 30 years and had wept at the funeral and had been the first person to call Dante when the will was read and had said, in the voice of a man performing grief so long it had become genuine, "Whatever you need, I am here for whatever you need." "You're certain," Dante said. "Douglas told me directly. I have the message." "Send it to Garrett, today." He walked back to the stairwell. He stopped with his hand on the door. "Marcus." He didn't turn around. "You coached my nephew's baseball team for 3 years." "Yes." Holt's voice was barely there. "I know." He pushed the door open and went down the stairs. He sat in the back of the car for 11 minutes before he told the driver to go. He did not call anyone. He looked at the gray November street through the window, and he thought about his uncle, and he thought about his father, and he thought about the specific shape of the betrayal, which was not the betrayal of an enemy that he could process, but the betrayal of a man who had known him since he was 7 years old, who had taught him to play chess on a board with pieces that had belonged to their grandfather, who had delivered the eulogy at Carlo's funeral, and said, in a voice that filled the room, "Carlo built something that will outlast all of us. And it will outlast us because of what he left behind in his son." He had been in that room. He had heard those words. He had believed them. He told the driver to go to Chen and Associates. The meeting with Chen's team ran 4 hours. Dante laid out everything: the access logs, the shell company trace, the financial positions, Holt's statement, the anonymous message, Bianca's partial admission, and now Victor. The lawyers listened with the focused silence of people being paid to absorb complexity without flinching, and at the end Chen herself, 52, small, with the kind of precision that came from 30 years of watching powerful men underestimate her, looked at the assembled evidence and said, "This is enough for a civil action and potentially criminal referral on the financial fraud elements. The corporate governance violations are clean. The conspiracy to manipulate media is harder, but not impossible." She tapped one page. Victor Morty complicates the family council process. He has procedural standing to contest any internal board action. "I know. You'll need to convene the full council before you move formally. If you move outside that process, he'll use the procedural challenge to create delay, and delay is what Ricci needs. How long to prepare the formal evidentiary presentation? 10 days, possibly 8 if we deprioritize everything else." 8, Dante said. Chen looked at him over her glasses. "You understand that once you convene the council with this material, there's no private resolution. It becomes an institutional record." "That's the point," he said. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded and began assigning tasks to her team with the efficient velocity of a woman who has been waiting for a client to say exactly that. He got home at 4 in the afternoon. Isabella was at the dining room table with her laptop and 3 stacked folders and a legal pad covered in her handwriting, which was small and angular and moved in straight lines across unlined paper with the discipline of someone who had trained it. Aurora was in the bouncer chair beside her, asleep. Isabella looked up. She read his face. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He told her about Holt. He told her about Victor. She listened without the intake of breath that most people have when something surprises them badly. She had a way of receiving hard information that he had always attributed to composure, but was beginning to understand was something different. It was the practiced stillness of a woman who had been managing her reactions in this marriage for 5 years because the cost of being visibly affected was not always worth paying. That understanding landed on him with a specific discomfort. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, Victor sat with me in the hospital, the day after Aurora was born. He brought flowers and he held her, and he told me she had Carlo's forehead. Dante said nothing. He sat there and held my daughter, and he was already... She stopped. The muscle in her jaw tightened and released. He was already in the middle of it. Yes. She looked at the legal pad in front of her. Then she closed it. What do you need from me? He hadn't expected that question phrased that way. He had expected the version that was really a statement, the version that meant I need things from you. And the actual question, direct and practical, hit him differently. Nothing right now, he said. 8 days and it goes to the council. And until then? Until then, I need the organization to look stable. I need to keep showing up. I need Ricci to believe he still has time. She nodded. She reopened the legal pad. I have a meeting with the East Side Youth Services Director on Thursday. The foundation structure is further along than I expected. Good. Alina is going to help with the operational side. She has nonprofit management experience I didn't know about. A pause. She's very good. She's always been very good, Dante said. Isabella looked at him. There was something in that look, not forgiveness exactly, that was too simple, but acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who has decided to move forward and has chosen, carefully, what she's taking with her and what she's leaving on the ground. 6 days passed. They were the longest 6 days Dante could remember in recent years, and his recent years had contained days that objectively qualified as worse. But those days had had the texture of crisis, urgent, kinetic, demanding immediate response. These 6 days had the texture of waiting, which was harder, because waiting required a sustained performance of normalcy that drew on reserves he hadn't known were limited. He went to the office, he ran meetings, he reviewed the Chen team's documentation as it compiled, section by section, and he called Garrett every morning at 7 and every evening at 9, and the picture that emerged was thorough and damning and built with the kind of precision that would survive scrutiny because it had been built to survive scrutiny. He went home. He was present. He sat on the floor with Aurora. He ate dinner with Isabella. He asked about the foundation meetings and listened to the answers, actually listened, not the surface listening he had practiced for years, nodding at appropriate intervals while his attention was already 3 moves ahead on something else. He listened to what she was building, and it was, he was discovering, genuinely interesting. She had identified a gap in the city's transitional housing system for minors that nobody with resources had looked at directly, and she was approaching it with the same contained, organized intelligence she brought to everything. And he felt, watching her explain the regulatory environment to him with a legal pad covered in diagrams and margin notes, the specific and belated recognition of something he had possessed and not adequately valued. On the 7th day, Bianca called. He answered. I need to tell you something before Thursday, she said. Her voice was stripped down. No professional register, no management, just the voice underneath, which was tired and taut. Something I didn't tell you in the office. He waited. Ricci didn't approach me directly at first. The first contact came through someone I trusted, someone who framed it as internal advocacy, said the organization was heading in a direction that was going to hurt people, that the Voss alignment had liability exposure that wasn't being disclosed to the board, that I had a responsibility to make sure certain information reached the right parties. She paused. I believed it. I want you to know that's not an excuse. I believed it and I did what I did, and the believing doesn't change the doing. But I want you to understand the entry point. Who was the first contact? A beat. Victor Morty, she said. He was standing in his office. He walked to the window and looked out at the city and stood there. He approached you personally. 3 months before the Grand Callaway. He told me he was worried about you, that you were isolated and making decisions without adequate counsel, and that the people who cared about the organization's future needed to act before real damage was done. Her voice was flat. He was very convincing. He spoke about Carlo, about what Carlo would have wanted. Of course he had. Of course that was the instrument. His father's name deployed by his father's brother as a key in the lock of every person who had loved Carlo Morti and now lived in the ambiguous space of an inheritance that felt both earned and incomplete. He knew about me, Dante said. He knew things that only someone close to you would know. About the decisions you were making, the deals in progress, the state of your marriage. She stopped. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said it that way. Say it directly. He told me your marriage was in trouble, that you were disconnected from Isabella, that the distance between you was affecting your judgment, that you were making decisions like a man trying to prove something instead of a man running a business. A pause. Some of it was true enough that it made the rest sound credible. Dante stood at the window for a moment. He thought about the 47 calls. He thought about Victor in the hospital holding Aurora and saying she had Carlo's forehead. He thought about the chessboard with the grandfather's pieces and 20 years of family dinners and the eulogy that had filled a room. Come to Chen's office tomorrow morning, he said. 9 a.m. Everything, all of it. Every conversation, every contact, every document that passed through your hands. You get one chance to put it all on the table, and this is it. I'll be there, she said. He ended the call. He stood at the window for another minute. Then he called Garrett. I need Victor Morti's schedule for the next 48 hours. Where he is, who he's meeting, and I need to know if he's been in contact with Ricci in the last week. Garrett didn't ask why. Give me an hour. Dante pulled up the family council protocol on his laptop. He read the convening requirements, the quorum rules, the notice period, the procedural framework that Carlo had put in place 20 years ago for exactly this kind of internal governance crisis, the framework that Victor had helped draft. The irony of that was almost architectural in its completeness. He sent Chen a message. Move the timeline. Kate says council convenes in 48 hours. Her response came back in 4 minutes. That's aggressive. We'll be ready. He closed the laptop and stood up and put on his jacket and left the office. He was home by 6:30. Isabella had the baby. She looked at him when he came in and said nothing, waiting. 48 hours, he said. I'm calling the council. She nodded. Victor will fight the procedural structure. He has standing to delay. Chen thinks we can hold the process if the documentation is complete enough. Is it? Almost. He sat on the couch. Aurora was on Isabella's lap, awake, doing her focused, effortful examination of her own hand that she had been conducting for the last several days as if it were the most complex problem she had ever encountered. Bianca confirmed Victor was the first contact. He used Carlo's name. He stopped. Isabella looked at him. He told her the marriage was in trouble, Dante said, that my judgment was compromised by it. He used our situation as a proof point that I was the wrong person to lead. Isabella was quiet for a moment. She looked at Aurora, then she looked back at him, and the expression on her face was not what he expected. It was not hurt, or anger, or the complicated mixture of both that he might have predicted. It was something colder and cleaner than either of those. Then make sure the council knows, she said, that whatever was true about this marriage 7 months ago is not true now, and make sure they see me in that room. He looked at her. I'm coming to the council, she said. Not as your wife in the chair against the wall, at the table, with you. Ricci and Victor built their strategy on the assumption that your personal life was your weak point. The only way to collapse that assumption is to show them it isn't. Isabella, I'm not asking, she said. The quiet in her voice had the specific density of something that has been decided and is not open for revision. I'm telling you what I'm doing. He held her gaze for a long moment. Aurora grabbed her mother's finger and held on with the complete, uncomplicated grip of someone who doesn't know yet that the things you hold can let you go. Okay, Dante said. He picked up his phone and called Victor Morti. Victor answered on the third ring with the warmth he always carried. Rich, immediate, the warmth of a man for whom warmth had become such a practiced instrument that he no longer distinguished it from something genuine. Dante, how are you? How's that beautiful girl? I'm convening the family council, Dante said. Day after tomorrow, 8 a.m. Attendance is mandatory for all 7 members. A pause. Short, But that's very short notice. There are members who will need to... The protocol requires 48 hours. I'm giving 48 hours. Dante's voice was level and without temperature. I'll be sending the formal notice through Chen and Associates within the hour. The evidentiary package will accompany it. A longer pause this time. Evidentiary package, Victor said. The warmth was still there, but it was thinner now, stretched over something else. That sounds serious. It is serious. Dante looked across the room at Isabella, who was watching him with the steady, clear attention of someone who has placed a bet and is watching the wheel. I'll see you in 48 hours, Victor. He ended the call. The room was quiet except for Aurora, who had released Isabella's finger and was now regarding the ceiling with the grave concentration of someone encountering it for the first time. Dante's phone lit up 30 seconds later. A message from an unsaved number, different from the first anonymous contact, different area code, different routing, but the same clean grammar, the same deliberate construction. It read, "He made a call 60 seconds after you hung up. The number is Ricci's direct line. They have a contingency. Watch the financial positions tonight." Dante stared at the message. Someone inside Ricci's operation was feeding him information in real time. Not a delayed tip, real time, 60 seconds of lag. Which meant the source was close enough to observe the call as it happened. Which meant the source was either in the room with Victor when Dante called, or was monitoring Victor's communications with the kind of access that required either technical sophistication or an inside position. Which meant there was a third party in this architecture that Dante had not accounted for, someone who was not aligned with Ricci, who had been watching the conspiracy from inside it, and was now, for reasons entirely their own, choosing to hand him the tools to dismantle it piece by piece. He didn't know who it was. He didn't know what they wanted. But the financial positions were the next move. Ricci's contingency, the minority stakes in the portfolio companies, the accumulated leverage that had been built over 2 years for exactly this moment. And if Ricci activated them tonight, before the council convened, the board composition shifted and the procedural ground Dante was standing on became a great deal less stable. He had 48 hours. He called Chen. "I need an emergency filing," he said, "to freeze the voting rights on the minority positions in the portfolio companies, pending the council investigation. How fast can you move?" Chen said, "If I work through the night, I can have it filed by 6 a.m. "Do it," he said. He set the phone down. He looked at Isabella. "It's going to get worse before Thursday," he said. She looked back at him without flinching. "I know," she said. Outside, the city had gone fully dark, and somewhere in it, Enzo Ricci was looking at his phone and beginning to understand that the man he had spent 2 years quietly dismantling had just stopped cooperating with the dismantling, and the contingency that was supposed to guarantee the outcome was about to meet a legal filing that would cut it off at the root before morning. Chen filed the emergency motion at 5:47 a.m. By 6:15, Ricci's legal team had been notified. By 6:30, Dante's phone was showing 3 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize and 1 from Victor, which he didn't answer. By 7, Garrett was in Dante's home office with a laptop and a coffee he hadn't touched, watching the overnight movement on the portfolio company positions. He tried to activate them, Garrett said. 11:43 p.m. Instruction went out to move on 2 of the 4 positions. Convert the minority stakes to active voting blocks through a proxy mechanism. The filing hit before the market opened and froze the conversion. He looked up. He came within 6 hours. Who's his legal team? Harmon Quell. Garrett said the name with the specific flatness reserved for opponents who deserve respect even when you're against them. Quell was 70 years old and had been practicing corporate law since before Dante was born, and had never in 45 years lost a case he'd prepared for. He'll challenge the filing on procedural grounds. Emergency injunctions in this jurisdiction require a showing of imminent, irreparable harm. We have it. We need to demonstrate it to a judge before noon, or the freeze lifts automatically. Garrett turned the laptop to face him. Chen is already in front of Judge Hargrove. Hearing is at 10. Dante looked at the time. 7:04. He had 1 hour before he needed to leave for the courthouse to sit behind Chen while she argued for the freeze, and then immediately after that, he needed to go to the council chambers where 7 people, one of whom wanted him removed and at least 2 of whom were compromised, would sit around a table and decide the future of an organization that his father had spent his life building and that Dante had spent 3 years trying to carry without fully understanding what carrying it cost. He went to the kitchen. Isabella was already up. She was at the counter with coffee, dressed in charcoal gray, a blazer, tailored trousers, the kind of outfit she wore when she was doing something that mattered. Her hair was pulled back. She looked composed in the way that required effort and didn't show the effort. Aurora was in the bouncer chair on the kitchen floor, still asleep. "How long is the hearing?" Isabella said. "An hour, maybe less. And the council starts at 8. I'll be late." He poured coffee. "I'll have Garrett explain the delay. The evidentiary package is already with all 7 members." She looked at him. "Victor will use the delay?" "I know." He drank. The coffee was too hot and he drank it anyway. "He'll try to call the session to order without me. Chen says the quorum rules require the convening member present for the opening. He can't proceed without me in the room." "What if he argues the convening right itself?" Dante set the mug down. "Then we argue it back. The documentation of his involvement disqualifies him from any procedural standing on this matter. Chen has the case law." He looked at her. "Are you ready for this?" She looked back at him steadily. "I've been ready for this for 5 years," she said. "I just didn't know which version of it I was getting ready for." He didn't have an answer for that. He kissed her once, brief, real, the kind of contact that doesn't ask for anything and carries weight anyway, and went to get his jacket. The courthouse on Mineral Street was the old kind, built in the 1920s with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo and every voice carry. Courtroom 7 was on the second floor, and Chen was already at the plaintiff's table when Dante came in at 9:52, her materials organized with the precision of a person who had been there since 9. Harmon Quell was at the defense table. He was a large man who had gotten larger with age without losing anything in the process. His presence in a room was still that of someone who assumed, correctly, that people would orient toward him. He glanced at Dante when he came in. The glance was professional, almost cordial. They had been in the same rooms before, though never across from each other. Judge Hargrove came in at 10 sharp. She was 58, with the compressed efficiency of someone who had been listening to arguments for 25 years and had developed a high tolerance for complexity and a very low tolerance for theater. Quell went first, as the respondent to the emergency filing. His argument was architecturally elegant. The emergency injunction standard required showing of imminent irreparable harm. The minority positions represented lawful market activity. The Morty organization had no demonstrated right to restrict the voting conversion of shares held by a separate legal entity, and the filing was therefore an improper use of emergency procedure to gain tactical advantage in an internal governance dispute. It was good. It was the kind of argument that won cases when there was no counter. Chen stood. She did not raise her voice at any point in the following 22 minutes. She laid out the chain, the shell company, the anonymous communications routing, the coordinated media manipulation, the timeline of financial position acquisition relative to the conspiracy's development, and the specific mechanism by which the voting conversion, if activated in the next 36 hours before the council convened, would artificially shift board composition in a way that directly benefited the party orchestrating the governance attack. Irreparable harm, she said, was not theoretical here. It had a name and a timeline and a financial structure attached to it. Judge Hargrove asked 4 questions. All 4 were precise. Chen answered all 4 without consulting her notes. The judge looked at Quell. Respondent? Quell stood. Your Honor, counsel's argument depends on evidentiary characterizations that have not been tested in any formal proceeding. The chain she describes is compelling, Hargrove said. I'm extending the freeze through close of business Thursday. If the council resolution renders the matter moot, the injunction dissolves automatically. If it doesn't, petitioner may return for a hearing on permanent relief. She looked at Quell. Don't come back to me with a procedural challenge on the council process. That's internal governance, and I won't touch it. She stood. The room stood. It was 10:43. Dante was already moving toward the door. The Morty organization's council chambers were in the building on Arroyo Street that Carlo had purchased in 1987 and had renovated twice since, most recently 6 years ago when Dante had pushed for the modernization of the infrastructure without touching the room itself. The council chamber stayed as it had always been. A long oval table in dark wood, 14 chairs, the walls hung with the photographs that Carlo had selected himself. The neighborhoods where the organization had started, the faces of people who had built something from nothing, no corporate art, no abstraction, just evidence. Dante arrived at 11:09. The room was already full. 6 of the 7 council members were seated. Victor Morty was at the far end of the table, in the chair that was not the chair of the convening member, but was close enough to it to be a statement. He was 67 years old, heavier than Dante remembered from the last council meeting 4 months ago, with his father's coloring and none of his father's particular quality of stillness. Victor's stillness was performed. Carlo's had been structural. Douglas Vane was at the table. He looked at Dante when he came in, and then immediately looked away, which was information. 3 other members, Carlo Reyes, the organization's longest-serving director, Joseph Ahn, who handled the Eastern operations, and Miriam Stahl, the legal compliance chair, were seated with the contained attention of people who had read the evidentiary package that Chen had sent at 6 a.m. and were processing it. The 7th member, Thomas Whitfield, the financial oversight director, was standing near the window with his phone to his ear and ended the call when Dante walked in. Isabella came in behind Dante. The room registered her presence with a subtle but complete shift, the small adjustments of posture that happen when something has entered that wasn't expected. Victor's eyes moved to her, and then to Dante, and then back to the table. And in that sequence, Dante saw the rapid calculation happening behind them. Dante went to the head of the table. He did not sit immediately. "We're convening," he said. Not loud. The room was quiet enough that he didn't need to be. "Full council, full quorum. The evidentiary package from Chen and Associates was delivered to each of you at 6 this morning. I'm going to assume you've read it. If you haven't, take the next 5 minutes." Silence. Nobody asked for 5 minutes. He sat. Isabella sat beside him to his right. Not against the wall, not in the observer position. At the table, with a copy of the Chen package in front of her and a legal pad and the same steady quality of attention she had brought to every conversation in the last 48 hours. Victor said, "I'd like to note for the record that the convening process here is procedurally irregular. The 48-hour notice is within protocol," Dante said. "Chen's brief on the matter is on page 31 of your package. Section 4. Victor's jaw tightened. The presence of a non-member at the council table, but my wife is here as a material witness to events documented in the evidentiary package. Her presence is within the council's discretionary authority under Article 7. You'll find the citation on the same page." A beat. 2. Carlo Reyes said quietly, "Let's proceed." She was 71, the oldest member in the room. She had known Carlo Morty for 40 years. She had known Victor for the same length of time, and the way she said those 2 words, without looking at Victor, without inflection, just forward, told Dante that she had read the package and had formed her view of it. Dante opened his copy. The package documents a coordinated campaign of internal information extraction, media manipulation, and financial positioning with the intent to destabilize the organization's leadership and install a replacement structure aligned with Ricci capital management. He looked up. The campaign involved 2 senior executives, a contracted political strategist, and at least 1 member of this council. He looked at Victor. Victor looked back at him. The warmth was gone now, completely, cleanly, the way a light goes when the power cuts. What was underneath it was not anger. It was something older and more settled than anger. It was the expression of a man who had been playing a long game and had arrived at the moment where the game becomes explicit and has decided that explicitness is a different kind of move, not a defeat. "You have no proof of my direct involvement," Victor said. "I have phone records," Dante said. "I have testimony from Bianca Rossi in a signed affidavit to Chen and Associates that you were her first contact and that you specifically framed the approach using Carlo's name and the state of my marriage as evidence of compromised leadership." He paused. "I have a meeting log placing you with Enzo Ricci on 7 occasions in the 14 months preceding the Grand Callaway. I have a financial disclosure from Ricci Capital that shows 3 of the 4 minority position acquisitions were initiated within 30 days of your meetings. He slid a document down the table. It stopped in front of Victor. Victor didn't pick it up. And, Dante said, I have a recording. The room went completely still. Victor's hands, flat on the table, did not move. But something happened around his eyes. A tightening, a micro-contraction that was the body's truth when the mind was managing a different performance. A phone call, Dante said. 11:44 p.m. 2 nights ago, 40 seconds after I called you to notify you of the council session. You called a number registered to Ricci Capital's direct line. The call lasted 4 minutes and 18 seconds. He looked at Victor steadily. The content of that call was provided to Chen and Associates by a source I'm not going to name in this room. The transcript is on page 47 of your package. Nobody moved to page 47. They were all watching Victor. Victor said, that recording was obtained illegally. The transcript was provided by a voluntary source who was party to the call, Dante said. Admissibility is a question for a different proceeding. In this room, it's evidence of your conduct as a council member. Douglas Vane stood up. Every head in the room turned. Vane was 58, and he had the build of a man who had played football in college and had been slowly losing the argument with age ever since. And right now, he looked like he hadn't slept in 4 days because he hadn't slept in 4 days. His face was gray and damp, and his hands weren't steady. I want to make a statement, he said. Victor said, Douglas, don't. Vane's voice cracked on it. Just that one word, just the one crack, but it was the sound of something structural giving way. He looked at Dante. I cooperated with Ricci's operation. The documents I provided, internal forecasts, structural memos, the preliminary Voss framework, I gave them over 14 months. Ricci told me it was to protect the organization, to force a governance correction before decisions were made that couldn't be undone. He swallowed. I believed it for the first 6 months. After that, he stopped. The room waited. After that, I kept going because stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. Nobody spoke. I'm resigning from the council and from my operational role effective immediately, Vane said. My full cooperation with Chen and Associates is already documented. I have... His voice went rough. He steadied it through visible effort. I have a lot to answer for. I know that. He sat down. He put his face in his hands for 1 second, just one, and then pulled them away and sat with the exposed stillness of a man who has nothing left to hide behind. Victor was looking at Dante. The calculation behind his eyes had not stopped. It had accelerated. You've built a case, Victor said. His voice was controlled, almost conversational, the tone of a man who is reframing the terrain in real time. Evidence that's been assembled by people with an interest in the outcome. Testimony from individuals who are themselves under investigation. A recording of unknown provenance. He spread his hands slightly on the table. What you're asking this council to do is take action against a member based on... Victor. Carla Reyes' voice was quiet and absolute. It was the voice of a woman who had earned the right to say one word and have it stop a room. I've known you since 1989. I've known what you were capable of for almost as long. She looked at the package in front of her. Don't talk to us like we're a jury. We're the people who built this thing with Carlo, and we know what betrayal looks like when it's documented. Victor's mouth closed. Joseph Ahn said, I move to suspend Victor Morty's council membership pending formal investigation. Miriam Stahl said, seconded. Dante said, all in favor. 4 hands. Reyes, Ahn, Stahl, Whitfield. Victor looked at each hand and then looked at Dante. In his eyes, beneath the calculation, beneath the performance, buried under 67 years of a man who had wanted what his brother had and had never been given it and had finally decided to take it, was something that was almost grief. Not for what he'd done, for the fact that it hadn't worked. This isn't finished, Victor said. No, Dante said. It's going to a formal legal process. Every piece of evidence goes to outside counsel and, depending on what they find, potentially to federal authorities. Your rights in that process are fully protected. He looked at his uncle. at the man who had held his daughter and said she had Carlo's forehead, and he felt something move through him that was not forgiveness and was not rage, but was the complicated, exhausted thing that lives between them. "You can leave now, Victor." Victor stood. He buttoned his jacket with the automatic precision of a man performing dignity when nothing else is available. He walked to the door. He opened it. He stopped with his back to the room. "Carlo would have handled this differently," he said. "I know," Dante said. "That's the point." Victor left. The door closed. The room exhaled. What followed was 4 hours of the most grueling institutional work Dante had done in his professional life. The council, reduced now to 5 active members plus Isabella as witness, worked through the evidentiary package section by section. Each document was reviewed, questioned, verified against the source material. Chen joined by secure video for 2 hours to answer legal questions. The Ricci Capital financial positions were mapped against the timeline of internal leaks. The shell company ownership chain was traced on a whiteboard that Garrett set up in the corner. Miriam Stahl, the legal compliance chair, meticulous and silent through most of it, identified something nobody else had caught. In the financial position documents, 2 of the 4 minority stakes had been acquired through an intermediary fund. The fund's beneficial ownership, buried 3 layers into the corporate structure, included a name. She said it quietly, turning the page toward Dante. The name on the document was Elena Morti, Dante's mother, who had died 11 years ago. He looked at it for a long moment. The room noticed him looking. "She's dead," he said. "The name is being used as a beneficial owner on a fund that's been active for 2 years, Stahl said. "Someone opened it in her name after her death, which is fraud, separately from everything else." Dante sat with that. His mother's name, lifted from whatever archive Enzo Ricci had access to and used as a container for money that was being positioned to remove her son from his own organization. The specific coldness of that detail, the way it reached into something personal and used it as raw material, settled over him with a weight that was different from everything else. He understood for the first time that this wasn't just about the organization. It never had been. It was about the Morty name itself, the full inheritance of it, the living and the dead both, mobilized as instruments in a game that had started before Dante was running it and had been designed to end before he understood what was happening. He looked at Isabella. She was looking at the document. Her face was very still. "Is Ricci in the building?" he said to Garrett. "He's in the lobby," Garrett said. "He arrived 20 minutes ago. His lawyer is with him." "Quell?" "No, junior partner. Quell doesn't do voluntary appearances." Dante stood. He looked at the council. "Take a break?" 30 minutes. He went downstairs. Enzo Ricci was 73 years old and looked 60. He was lean, white-haired, dressed with the specific, understated elegance of old money. Not the display of wealth, but the assumption of it. Clothes so well made they had stopped trying to prove anything. He was seated in the lobby with a posture that suggested he was waiting for a lunch reservation rather than the outcome of a governance session that could end his career and his freedom. His lawyer, young, dark-suited, visibly nervous, stood when Dante approached. Ricci did not stand. He looked at Dante with the particular composure of a man who has played long games and understands that the endgame is just another phase. His eyes were light gray and sharp, and gave away nothing that he didn't choose to give. "Dante," he said. The warmth in his voice was different from Victor's, more genuine in its way, which made it worse. "You look tired." Dante sat down across from him. He didn't respond to the observation. "My mother's name," Dante said. Ricci's eyes moved slightly, just slightly. "Elena Morti, deceased 11 years. Named as beneficial owner of a fund that holds 2 of the 4 portfolio positions you've been building for the past 2 years. Dante leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, looking directly at the old man. "That was Enzo. That specific choice. Not Victor, not Holt, not any of the instruments you used. That was you." Ricci was quiet for a moment. Then, "I loved your father." "I know you did." "Carlo built something extraordinary, with his hands, his intelligence, and you helped him." Dante's voice was level and without heat. For 22 years, you sat at his right hand and you helped him, and you were good at it, and he trusted you completely. And when he died and left it to me instead of to a structure that would have given you more permanent control, you decided the succession was wrong. Ricci said nothing. You didn't want to destroy the organization, Dante said. You wanted to run it. You wanted to be the hand inside the glove. He looked at the old man steadily. And you used my mother's name to do it. Ricci's composure shifted, fractionally, barely detectably, but Dante was watching for it and he saw it. A tightening around the mouth, the eyes going very still in a way that was not calmness, but its suppression. The fund was a structural decision made by people I engaged, Ricci said. The name, don't. Dante's voice didn't rise. It went down, actually, quieter, which was worse. Don't tell me the name was a structural decision. Nothing in what you built was accidental. You're too careful for accidents. The young lawyer put a hand on Ricci's arm. Mr. Ricci, I'd advise— I know what you'd advise, Ricci said without looking at him. He was still looking at Dante. Something had shifted in his expression. The composure was intact, but the performance underneath it had changed. The way a piece of music changes when the tempo drops and you realize the melody has been there the whole time under something louder. I built this organization, Ricci said. Not alone, not without Carlo. But the strategies, the frameworks, the financial architecture that made it possible for your father to build anything at all, those were mine. 22 years of mine. And when Carlo died and left it to a son who spent the first 3 years of his tenure making unilateral decisions without understanding what he had, he stopped. The composure was doing its work. I made choices. Some of them were wrong. Some of them were fraud, Dante said. Yes. The admission landed in the lobby like something dropped from a height. The young lawyer went very still. Dante looked at Enzo Ricci, at the 73-year-old man who had loved his father and betrayed his mother's name and spent 2 years building a machine designed to hollow out everything Carlo had left behind. And he felt the specific, terrible clarity of a moment when you understand someone completely and the understanding doesn't simplify anything. You're going to provide a full accounting to Chen and Associates, Dante said. Every entity, every position, every instruction given and received, every person you paid, and every person you pressured, complete and documented. He paused. If it's complete, I'll recommend to Chen that we pursue civil rather than criminal referral. If anything is missing or false, the recommendation changes. Ricci looked at him. Why? He said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Because criminal prosecution destroys more than it resolves, Dante said. And because you're 73 years old and you helped my father build something real, and that doesn't erase what you did, but it's a fact I'm capable of holding at the same time. He stood. And because the organization is better served by transparency and institutional reform than by a public war that benefits nobody except the people who make money on chaos. He straightened his jacket. Your lawyer has my counsel's contact information, he said. You have 24 hours. He turned and walked back toward the elevator. Behind him, he heard Ricci say, quietly, to no one in particular, or to himself, or possibly to the memory of a man who had been dead for 3 years. He's more like Carlo than he knows. Dante pressed the elevator button. The doors opened. He stepped inside and turned around, and for the last time in that lobby, he looked at Enzo Ricci, the old man sitting in the chair with his careful posture and his quiet face, and 22 years of a story that had just reached its last chapter. And then the doors closed, and the elevator went up, and Dante stood in the rising box and breathed. Just breathed. His hands were steady. His chest was tight. He was sweating along his collar for the first time today, the body finally releasing what the mind had been managing for 4 hours. The elevator opened on the council floor. Garrett was waiting. The anonymous source, Dante said. The messages. The real-time tip about Victor's call. We traced it, Garrett said. He handed over a single sheet. It's Quell. Dante looked at the sheet. Harmon Quell. He's been Ricci's lawyer for 12 years. He apparently decided somewhere in the last month that the fraud elements crossed a line he wasn't willing to be on the wrong side of. He started feeding us information 2 weeks ago. Dante looked at the sheet for a moment. Then he handed it back. Keep it internal, he said. He made a choice. Let him live with it quietly. He went back into the council chamber. Isabella looked up when he came in. He sat down beside her. He put his hand briefly on the table, not on hers, not yet, just near, close enough to be in the same space. And she glanced at it, and then looked back at the documents in front of her. Carlo Reyes looked at Dante across the table. Well? He'll cooperate, Dante said. Reyes looked at him for a long moment with the eyes of a woman who had seen 71 years of human behavior and had developed strong views about which kinds of choices people actually made versus the kinds they said they made. She appeared to decide that she believed him. Then let's finish this, she said. The council reconvened. The afternoon light through the high windows of the chamber moved across the table as the hours passed, and they worked through every section, and the evidence was thorough and it held. And at 5:23 p.m., Miriam Stahl called for the final resolution. A formal suspension of the compromised positions, a mandated independent audit, a restructuring of the council's oversight mechanisms, and a referral of the financial fraud elements to outside legal counsel for determination of appropriate next steps. The vote was 5-0. Dante watched each hand rise and felt something he did not entirely have a word for. Not triumph, not relief. Both of those were too simple. Something more like the specific exhaustion that arrives when a thing you've been holding up for a long time is finally set down on solid ground. He looked at Isabella. She was writing something on her legal pad. She finished, set the pen down, and looked back at him. Aurora's going to wake up from her nap in about 40 minutes, she said. We should go home. He looked at her. Yes, he said. He gathered the documents. He shook hands around the table. He thanked Carlo Reyes last, and she held his hand in both of hers for a moment, and said nothing, and that said everything. They went downstairs. The lobby was empty. Ricci had gone. The young lawyer had gone. The building was settling into the quiet of early evening. In the car, neither of them spoke for 3 blocks. Then Isabella said, "The foundation's legal structure is approved. Alina finalized the paperwork this afternoon." She looked out the window. "I was going to tell you tonight anyway, but..." A pause. It felt like the right day for it. He looked at her profile, the city going past the window behind her, the particular way the evening light caught the side of her face. "What are you going to call it?" he said. He knew, she'd told him, but he wanted to hear her say it again in this specific moment. "The Aurora Carter Foundation," she said. Carter was her mother's maiden name. Not Morty, hers. He thought about that, about the choice of it, the careful deliberateness, the way it was connected to him through Aurora and independent of him through everything else. And he thought about a man in a lobby saying he's more like Carlo than he knows. And he thought about what his father had built and what it had cost and what he was going to do differently, starting now, starting already, starting with the hand he was about to put on his wife's in the back of a car going home to a daughter who would be awake in 40 minutes and would not care at all about any of it, would only care that the hands reaching for her were ones she recognized. He put his hand over Isabella's. She turned hers over and held it. Outside, the city moved past, indifferent and continuous, doing what cities do, surviving, generating, replacing itself, holding the lives inside it without particular care for any one of them. And without malice either. Just the vast, grinding persistence of a thing that will be here long after the particular drama of this particular Tuesday has dissolved into the layer of history where most things go. The car turned onto their street. In 24 hours, Enzo Ricci would begin his full accounting. In 72 hours, the first piece would appear in a legitimate financial outlet. Not a scandal piece, not a tabloid photograph, but a documented institutional story about a governance crisis in the Morty organization that had been resolved through legal process and internal reform, rather than the kind of violence and retaliation that organizations like this one were assumed to traffic in. In 1 week, Senator Voss would issue a full statement about the waterfront proposal and its collapse, and the word corruption would appear in the coverage. But Dante Morty's name would appear in the same paragraph as the word transparency. And that juxtaposition would become, slowly and without drama, the new story. None of that had happened yet. Right now there was just the car and the street and the building with the pale yellow door on the fourth floor, and inside it a daughter who was about to wake up in a world that her father had just decided to try to deserve. The car stopped. Dante got out. He held the door. Ricci's full accounting arrived at Chen and Associates at 11:47 a.m. the following day, 3 minutes before the 24-hour deadline. It was 214 pages. Chen called Dante at noon. Her voice had the quality it got when she was reading something that surprised her, which didn't happen often. "It's complete," she said. "More than complete. He documented things we hadn't found. 3 additional entities, a secondary communications channel that predates everything we identified by 8 months, and a detailed record of every instruction given to Holt and Vane over the full 14-month period." A pause. He also documented his own role with a specificity that isn't legally required. He didn't have to go this far. Dante thought about the lobby, about Ricci's voice saying, "I loved your father," about the specific quality of a man who, having finally decided to account for something, accounts for it completely because partial accounting is a form of continued dishonesty, and Enzo Ricci, whatever else he was, had never been sloppy. "What's your recommendation?" Dante said. "Civil action on the financial fraud, federal referral on the beneficial ownership fraud. The use of your mother's name is a separate criminal matter that we don't have the discretion to not report. On the conspiracy elements," Chen paused. "Given the cooperation, given his age, given the nature of the documentation he's provided, a federal prosecutor may well conclude that a cooperation agreement serves the public interest better than prosecution. That's not my decision to make." "No, but your statement to the prosecutor's office will carry weight." Dante looked out his office window. The city was gray and still, a November morning with low cloud cover that turned everything the same flat color. "Write the referral accurately," he said. "Include the cooperation. Include the completeness of the accounting. Let the process determine the outcome." "Understood." A pause. "Dante, this is what you've built here procedurally is going to be studied. An organization that handled an internal governance attack of this scale through legal process and documentation rather than—" "It's not done yet," he said. "I know, but I wanted to say it." He ended the call and sat for a moment with the silence of the office around him. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out the document he'd placed there 3 days ago, after Garrett had delivered it as part of the Ricci materials. A single sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the corners. His name written on the front in handwriting he recognized with the specific bodily recognition of something that bypasses thought entirely and goes directly to the chest. Carlo Morti's handwriting. Garrett had found it in the files that Ricci had handed over. It had been in Ricci's possession for 3 years, since Carlo's death, held among the papers that Ricci had retained as executor of certain private matters. A role Carlo had assigned him and that Dante had not thought to examine in the chaos of the estate settlement. Dante had not opened it yet. He had known it was there and had let it sit for 3 days because there are things you are not ready for until you are, and you cannot accelerate the readiness. He opened it now. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, dated 6 weeks before Carlo's death. The handwriting was steady throughout. Carlo had not known, at the point of writing, how close the end was, or had known and refused to let it show in his hand. He read it slowly. Carlo wrote the way he spoke, without ornament, without sentiment that he hadn't earned. The first page was about the organization, about the specific vulnerabilities that Carlo had identified in his own structure in the last years of his life, the places where he had sacrificed accountability for efficiency and had known he was doing it and had kept going because there was always something more urgent demanding attention. He named Enzo by name, not as a threat, as a concern. Enzo is loyal to the idea of what we built more than to what it should become. Watch the space between those two things. That space is where trouble grows. He had known. Carlo had known, and had written it down. And the letter had sat in Enzo Ricci's possession for 3 years, while Ricci spent those same 3 years doing exactly what Carlo had described. The specific brutality of that was not something Dante could fully process in a single reading. He moved past it. The second page was shorter. You're going to make mistakes I didn't make and repeat some that I did. That's the nature of it. What I want to tell you, and what I should have said in person more than I did, is that the organization is not the point. I know I behaved as if it was. I know you learned from watching me that it was. I was wrong about that, and I knew I was wrong about it earlier than I admitted. And I kept going because stopping to examine that particular wrongness felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. It is not a luxury. It is the cost of everything else. You will understand this at some point, probably through a failure, because that is how I understand most things. And when you understand it, I want you to know that I saw it coming and I couldn't find the language for it while I was alive, and I am sorry for that. Take care of your wife. Take care of your children, however many there are. Be present. Not available, present. The difference between those two things is not subtle, and I spent 30 years pretending it was. The empire can survive financial loss. It cannot survive being led by a man who has forgotten what it is for. I love you. I didn't say that enough either. Dante sat with the letter for a long time. The office was quiet. The city outside the window was gray and continuous. Somewhere in the building, people were working. Phones, keyboards, the soft machinery of an organization that had survived a governance attack and was still running, still generating, still doing the thing it did. He folded the letter carefully along its original creases and put it in his jacket pocket, against his chest, and sat there for another minute before he stood up and went to find Garrett. Douglas Vane resigned formally on a Wednesday. The announcement was handled through Chen's office with a statement that was accurate and minimal, personal reasons, effective immediately, wishing the organization well, and the financial press covered it in 3 paragraphs because by that point, the larger story had absorbed it. Marcus Holt followed 2 days later, the same process, the same brevity. The federal referral on the beneficial ownership fraud went to the prosecutor's office on a Thursday. Dante did not attend the filing. He was at Mercy General. Aurora's 2-month checkup. He had put it in his calendar 6 weeks in advance. He sat in the pediatrician's waiting room with Isabella while Aurora slept in the carrier against Isabella's chest, making the small, definitive sleeping sounds of a person who had decided sleep was the priority and had committed to it fully. The waiting room had bright primary colors and a small collection of worn board books stacked on a low table, and 3 other families in various states of the specific exhausted patients that parents of young children carry as a permanent condition. Isabella was reading something on her phone. Foundation documents, Dante guessed from the focused way her eyes moved across the screen. She had been in 3 meetings in the last week about the East Side facility, a building that a property management company was making available at below market rate as a philanthropic gesture that Dante suspected had something to do with his quiet recommendation to 2 people he knew on their board, but which he had not mentioned to Isabella because it was her foundation, and the recommendation was the extent of his involvement, and the outcome needed to belong to her. The nurse called them back. The pediatrician, Dr. Ewan, 38, efficient and warm in equal measure, did the exam with the practiced thoroughness of someone who had done it 10,000 times and had not made it routine. She measured, she checked. She looked into Aurora's eyes and said something to her in a quiet voice that was just between them. Aurora stared back at her with the total, non-negotiable attention of an infant encountering a new face. "She's tracking well," Dr. Ewan said. "Responsive, alert. Weight is perfect. Growth curve is right where we want it." She looked up. "She's a strong kid." Isabella said, "We know." Dr. Ewan glanced at Dante. "Dad's making the appointments now?" "Dad is making the appointments," Dante said. Dr. Ewan smiled at the chart. "Good." On the way out of the building, Isabella stopped on the sidewalk to adjust Aurora in the carrier, and Dante stood beside her on the cold pavement and watched his daughter's face emerge from the adjustment. The dark eyes open now, looking at the gray November sky with the same absolute attention she gave to everything, as if the sky were a problem she intended to solve. "She's going to be relentless," Dante said. "Yes," Isabella said. She snapped the carrier clasp and looked up. "She gets it from both sides." They walked to the car together. It was cold and the street was wet from last night's rain, and the city was doing its thing, loud, indifferent, continuous, and none of it landed the way it used to, which was to say it landed differently now, with a different quality of awareness, the way the same street can feel completely unlike itself depending on who you are when you're walking it. 3 weeks later, Victor Morty called. Dante answered. Victor's voice was different, not broken. Victor was not the kind of man who broke. That was structural to who he was, but reduced, the way a fire reduces when the fuel runs out, still hot but contained now within a much smaller perimeter. I've engaged my own counsel, Victor said. Separate from Ricci's process. They've advised full cooperation with the federal inquiry. That's the right decision, Dante said. I know. A pause. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I want you to understand that. Okay. I'm calling because... Victor stopped. The line was quiet for a moment. I'm calling because I owe you a conversation that isn't going to happen in front of lawyers, and because you answered the phone, which tells me you're willing to have it. Dante sat down in the chair by the window of his home office. Outside, the city was doing the early December thing, the light going at 4 in the afternoon, the windows across the street beginning to glow yellow and warm against the dark. Talk, Dante said. I wanted what Carlo had, Victor said. I have wanted it my entire adult life. Not just the organization, what Carlo had, the way a room responded to him, the way people moved toward him. A pause. I was the younger brother. That is not an excuse. It is a fact that I am telling you because you deserve to understand the shape of it. Dante said nothing. When Carlo died and left it to you, structurally, as he should have, as it made sense, I experienced something I have been calling by different names for 3 years because the accurate name was too simple. Victor's voice was steady but effortful, the way a voice gets when it is saying a thing that costs something. I was jealous of a 38-year-old who had not yet made the mistakes I had already made. And instead of sitting with that and letting it be an uncomfortable fact about myself, I built something around it. You built something that used my mother's name, Dante said. Yes. The word came out flat and without defense. That was Ricci's decision on the structural level, but I knew. I was told and I said nothing, and that... He stopped. That is the part I am least able to account for. Dante held the phone and looked at the window and thought about his mother. Elena Morty, who had died 11 years ago of a sudden cardiac event at 58 years old, who had made coffee too strong and had never learned to drive and had called Dante every Sunday for the 12 years between his leaving home and her death, without fail, regardless of what was happening, because Sunday was Sunday. Who had met Enzo Ricci at 47 family dinners over 22 years and had considered him a trusted presence in her home. Victor, he said, yes. I'm not going to tell you it's forgiven. That's not where I am. I know. But I'm also not going to tell you you're finished. You're 67 years old and you have... He thought about it. You have things you can still do correctly. The cooperation is one. What comes after it is another. A long pause. That is more than I expected, Victor said. Don't make me regret it. The call ended. Dante sat in the chair for a few minutes. Then he got up and went to find his daughter. But the Aurora Carter Foundation opened its operational office on the 12th of December in a building on the east side of the city that smelled of fresh paint and possibility in the specific way that only new beginnings in old buildings smell. The space was modest. 4 rooms, a reception area, a small conference room, and Isabella had furnished it herself over 3 weekends with Alina's help, and the choices were deliberate and good, nothing corporate, nothing that announced wealth, things that announced use, that said people would work here and the work would be real. There was no grand opening. Isabella had been explicit about that. No press event, no ribbon cutting, no ceremony designed to put the foundation's name in the news cycle for reasons that had more to do with optics than with the work itself. She held a small gathering for the people directly involved. Alina, who was serving as operations director, 2 program staff she had hired after 3 rounds of careful interviews, the Eastside Youth Services director who had become a genuine partner, and Chen, who came with a bottle of champagne she said was from her personal collection and which Dante suspected had been selected with some care. Dante brought Aurora. Aurora was now 10 weeks old and had developed strong opinions about being held and about light sources, both of which she communicated with the full force of her personality. She spent the first part of the gathering in Alina's arms. regarding the new office with the serious appraisal of someone conducting an inspection, and the second part in Dante's arms, doing the same. Isabella moved through the room with a quality that Dante watched carefully. She was not performing. That was the thing he kept coming back to. In 5 years of watching Isabella in social situations, he had learned to distinguish the register she used when she was managing a room from the register she used when she was genuinely inside a moment. And what he was watching now was the second thing. She was talking to the program staff with the specific attention of someone who has chosen the work and is already inside it, already thinking about the next problem, already past the event and into the substance. He watched her and felt something he did not have an immediate word for. Not pride. That was too simple, too one-directional. Something more mutual. The recognition of another person's depth arrived at through the specific process of having failed to see it clearly and then being corrected by events until you could. Alina materialized beside him. She looked at Aurora and then at Dante. She had not been warm to him since the hospital. Not cold, not hostile, but measured, the way someone is with a person who has damaged their trust and is in the process of rebuilding it and has not yet reached the other side. "She's getting heavy," Alina said, nodding at Aurora. "Yes." "She's going to walk early. Look at how she pushes against your arm." Dante looked down. Aurora was indeed using his forearm as a resistance surface, pushing her feet against it with the focused determination of someone who has identified a direction and intends to get there before the relevant biology permits. "Isabella was early," Dante said. 13 months, Alina confirmed. She looked at the room, at Isabella in conversation with the East Side director, both of them leaning over a document on the conference table. "She's going to be good at this." "I know. She was always going to be good at something like this. She just needed—" Alina stopped herself, reconsidered. She needed the space to build it. Dante heard what was in that sentence, the thing not said, that you didn't always give her. He heard it and he did not argue with it because it was accurate, and arguing with accurate things was a habit he was working to retire. "I know that too," he said. Alina looked at him for a moment. The measurement in her eyes did something, not dissolved, but adjusted, recalibrated towards something that was at least adjacent to neutral. "She still needs it," Alina said. "This isn't a thing that happened and is now in the past. It's a thing that has to keep being true." "I understand." "Good." She looked back at Aurora. "She really does have your coloring. So I'm told." "It suits her," Alina said, which was as close to a peace offering as Alina was going to make today, and Dante accepted it for what it was. What? The federal process moved at the pace that federal processes move, which is to say it moved without drama and without speed. Through the winter and into early spring, each step generating documents and depositions and the kind of careful institutional language that accumulates around serious events as a form of containment. Enzo Ricci entered into a cooperation agreement in February. The terms were not public in their specifics, but the outcome was no criminal prosecution, full civil liability acknowledged, financial restitution to the Morty organization for the costs associated with the remediation of the conspiracy, and a permanent injunction against participation in any governance or advisory role in organizations connected to the Morty family interests. Ricci Capital Management dissolved in March. Enzo Ricci retired to a property in the Northeast that had been in his family since before his association with Carlo Morty, and the last piece of information Dante received about him through a second-hand channel was that he had started keeping a garden. Victor Morty cooperated fully with the federal inquiry. His cooperation was the thing that kept the conspiracy charges against him at the civil level rather than criminal. And when the process concluded in late spring, he emerged diminished and legally constrained but not destroyed. He moved to a smaller apartment in a different part of the city. He did not attend any Morty family events in the subsequent year. He did not call. Dante did not call either. That chapter was not finished exactly. That was the specific truth that Dante held about Victor. That these things don't finish in the neat way that legal processes finish, that a man who taught you chess when you were 7 years old and then used your dead mother's name against you is not someone you resolve in a single phone call or even a series of them. The chapter was ongoing and open and would remain that way for some time, possibly always, and he had made his peace with the open-endedness of it because the alternative was to close it prematurely and call the premature closure resolution, which he had seen other people do and had watched it cost them in ways they didn't always recognize. Marcus Holt retired from the industry. He sold his house and moved with his wife to the coast. He sent Dante a letter in April, handwritten, 3 pages, that Dante read twice and put in the same drawer as his father's letter. Not together, separately. They were not the same thing. But they were both letters from men who had done wrong, and had tried to say so in writing because some things need to be said in writing, and Dante found that he could hold that without either exonerating Holt or condemning him past what the facts supported. The Morty Financial Group restructured its internal governance in the first quarter of the new year. The council was reformed with clearer accountability mechanisms. The executive oversight process was documented and procedurally bound in ways it had not been under Carlo, and the position of independent compliance monitor, a role that reported to the full council rather than to any individual, was created and filled by a woman named Ruth Park, who had spent 20 years in federal regulatory work and had opinions about corporate governance that she expressed without deference to anyone's title. Dante hired her specifically because she would tell him when he was wrong. That was the job description, essentially. He had thought about his father's letter when he wrote it. Aurora turned 6 months old on a Saturday in late May. The day was warm, genuinely warm, the first real warmth of the spring, the kind of day that feels like a promise being kept after a long wait. Isabella had opened the windows in the apartment, and the air moving through them smelled of the city and something green underneath it, whatever was growing in the park 2 blocks over. Aurora had, in the 6 months of her existence, developed from a person with opinions into a person with a personality, which was a different thing. She had a way of assessing new situations, a long, careful look, followed by a decision about whether the situation warranted engagement, that Isabella said was pure Dante, and that Dante said was pure Isabella. And that was probably, in the honest accounting, both of them in equal measure working themselves out in a 10-pound person who was not yet aware that she was doing it. She was sitting up now, unsteadily, on the blanket on the living room floor, and she kept trying to lean forward to reach a set of plastic rings that were approximately 4 inches beyond her current reach. And every attempt ended the same way: the lean, the overcorrection, the topple. And every topple produced approximately 2 seconds of offended indignation, followed by the repositioning and the next attempt. Dante was on the floor beside her. He had been there for 40 minutes. He had learned in the course of these 40 minutes that Aurora's preference was for him to be present but not to intervene, which she communicated by batting his hand away when he reflexively reached toward her after each topple. She didn't want to be saved. She wanted to solve the problem. He kept his hands to himself and watched her work. Isabella came in from the kitchen and sat down on the floor on Aurora's other side, tucking her legs under her. She watched the ring-reaching operation for a moment. "She's going to get it," Isabella said. "Eventually," Dante said. "Today," Isabella said, with certainty. He looked at her. She was watching Aurora with the expression she had, the one that was simply and completely love, without any of the management that love sometimes requires in the face of other people, which is to say it was love in its most direct form, unmediated, the thing before the performance of it. "The first program cohort starts in 2 weeks, Isabella said. She was talking about the foundation. The first group of young people aging out of the city's transitional housing system who would be served by the foundation's flagship program: housing support, educational continuity, employment navigation. 11 young people. Their files were in a stack on the dining room table. "Are you ready?" he said. She thought about it, actually thought about it, which she always did when a question deserved it. "I'm as prepared as I can be for something I've never done before," she said, "which means I'm going to get some things wrong." "Yes." "And correct them." "Yes." She looked at him sideways. "You're not going to tell me it's going to be fine?" "It's going to be hard," he said, "and you're going to be good at it." She looked back at Aurora. "That's the right answer," she said. Aurora lunged again, the topple, the indignation, the repositioning. Dante's hand moved toward her automatically, and he stopped it. Aurora recalibrated. She adjusted her base, both hands flat on the blanket now, weight distributed differently, learning from the previous attempts without appearing to, the way bodies learn before minds catch up. She leaned. She reached. Her fingers closed around the ring. She held it up and looked at it with the expression of someone who has suspected all along that this was achievable and has now confirmed the hypothesis. Then she put it in her mouth. Isabella made a sound that was barely audible. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything with a name, just the sound that escapes when something small and complete occurs and you're close enough to witness it. Dante sat on the floor of his living room with that sound in the room around him, and his daughter chewing on a plastic ring, and his wife's shoulder 6 inches from his own, and the warm spring air coming through the open windows, and the letter in the desk drawer in his office that said, "Be present," in his dead father's handwriting, and the specific, earned, non-simple quality of a morning in which nothing dramatic was happening and everything that mattered was. He had built an empire and nearly lost a family, and had spent 47 missed calls learning the difference between those two things. He had learned it the hard way, which was the only way he had ever learned anything, and the learning had cost what the learning cost, and the cost was a fact he would carry without putting it down, without calling it anything other than what it was. He was present. Not managing his presence, not scheduling it, not allocating it as a resource. Present the way the air was present, simply, continuously, without requiring acknowledgement. Isabella leaned her head against his shoulder. Brief. She didn't say anything. He didn't move. Outside, the city turned in its morning light, and the park 2 blocks over was filling with people who had the same idea about the first real warm day of the year. And somewhere in the institutional machinery of the city, the Aurora Carter Foundation's first cohort files were waiting in a stack on a dining room table. And somewhere in a coastal town, a man named Marcus Holt was probably looking at the ocean. And somewhere in a northeastern garden, an old man who had loved the wrong thing in the wrong way was probably looking at whatever he had planted and thinking about what grows and what doesn't and why. And in an apartment on the 4th floor of a building with a pale yellow door, Dante Morty was on the floor with his daughter and his wife on a Saturday morning in late May, and Aurora was holding the ring, and Isabella was warm against his shoulder, and he was not anywhere else. He was here. That was the whole of it. That was enough.